everyone. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm very excited to talk about this subject. It's actually going to be difficult to keep everything well, it could just go on for much longer than 45 minutes, but I'll just try to sum everything up as concisely as possible to give you a little bit of an introduction, let's say, to the École de Nancy. So I like to start by giving a little bit of historical context in order to get a better picture of the rest of the talk and a better idea of what and where, when, where we're going to look at. So the Art Nouveau movement in Nancy starts to happen as well during the Franco-Prussian War. So at that time, Napoleon III wanted to regain some of the territories that were near what's Germany now, and he was fighting against the King William of Prussia, and that individual wanted to actually unite Germany. And on the illustration you see here on the right, we see when the event when Napoleon III surrenders in Sedan. So Nancy actually remained in France after Alsace and part of the Lorraine were ceded to the German Empire. But that actually resulted in a considerable migration of French musicians, artisans, teachers, and business people from the German-occupied Lorraine to Nancy. And that meant that the population of Nancy grew of more than 100,000 people, which made it actually the largest town in eastern France. It became the region's economic, political, and cultural hub. There was also, importantly enough, some excellent transportation links to Paris and the rest of France because it had a very strategic location along the German border. That is important for us because, of course, the Art Nouveau does not only happen in Nancy, but also in Paris. And as you'll see, some of the artists we talk about were very involved in working in Paris as well as they were working in Nancy, and these transportation links actually help them be able to be in both sides. Now, what are the origins of the Art Nouveau? The roots can be traced back to the arts and craft movement in England during the second half of the 19th century. The arts and craft movement was a response to the growing industrialization in Europe. We see artists from this movement that actually regretted the rise of factory mass production at the expense of traditional craftsmanship. And the leader of this movement is William Morris. He was an English designer, architect, writer, and socialist that we see here in the picture on this slide. His ideals of artisanal craftsmanship and his use of stylized floral and organic forms really resonated a lot with some of the artists of the Art Nouveau in France as well as other countries. Talking of other countries, the term Art Nouveau appeared in 1884 in the Belgian journal called L'Art Moderne. It's a term that referred to a group of reform-minded sculptors, designers, and painters that was called Les 20, the 20. The spirit of the new movement did spread quickly around all of Europe, and the name was quickly translated in other languages like Jugendstil, Modernismo, Secession, Stile Floreal, and other similar terms. One of the important things to say about the Art Nouveau is that, like other movement that appeared at the same period in time, it completely rejected historical styles. Now, the École de Nancy really was a local variation of the rest, like in comparison to the rest of the Art Nouveau in France. Why that? Well, in Nancy, we see a group of artisan designers that were working together between 1890 and 1914. The leaders were Émile Gallet, who was a glass and furniture designer, Louis Majorel, an ebonist, and Jacques Gruber, who was a glass artist. And here, the poster that you see is the poster of the decorative art exhibition in 1894. So it's one of the first gathering of these artists together. So the group participated in the Paris World Fair in 1900s. There was a positive reception followed by a great success. In 1901, the group published the formal goals of the school as a provincial alliance of the industries of the art. Their goals were to organize expositions and artist workshops. They were encouraging the reform of the artistic education, and they also wanted to adapt the arts to the new industrial methods of production. So the founding committee was led by the following artists: Émile Gallet, Louis Majorel, Jean-Antonin Daume, and Eugène Vallin. But the total number of artists that were working together was about 36. For that exhibition in 1900, the artists from the Art Nouveau movement exhibited on the Esplanade des Invalides, and we see that broad walkway which was on the Seine's right bank. What were they showing? Well, they exhibited jewelry, costumes, ceramics, furniture, carpets, and all other aspects of interior design in this new style. And the veritable stars of the show were Émile Gallet as well as René Lalique. We won't talk about René Lalique in this talk because he was not working in Nancy. So talking about Émile Gallet, I think someone may have their, I'm just gonna, yeah, I think there won't be echo anymore. Thank you. So Émile Gallet was the son of a merchant of glassware and ceramics who had settled in Nancy in 1844. On his mother's side, the family owned a manufacturer of mirror. So as a young man, Émile studied photography and natural science. And when he was 16, he went to work in the family business. He quickly started to incorporate in the faience and glass objects some floral designs. And on the side, there's no surprise, he actually became an accomplished botanist, and he quickly turned to collecting species from the region as well as other plants from Italy and Switzerland. It's also from a young age that he started drawing plants, flowers, animals, and insects that he would later incorporate in his design. In 1885, he opened his first shop in Paris at the 12 Rue Richter, and we see here on the top right one image that shows like the sort of label that was from his shop in Paris. And after opening that store, he opened two others, one in Frankfurt and London, that show a little bit the appeal that was present for his pieces. He really urged artists to return to nature as their principal source of inspiration. We see here a cross of Lorraine that was in his early work. Of course, that was the patriotic symbol of the region. And we see here some naturalist element and we see the floral, oops, sorry for that. The floral elements, the very curved lines that will be present throughout all the pieces of this movement. Well, he actually participated in several international exhibitions. We see some of his pieces present at the Universal Exhibition in Paris in 1878 before the Great Exhibition, but he also exhibited in Chicago in 1893 and finally in 1900s. At the latest exhibition, he received 2 grand prizes, a gold medal, and a title of a commander in the Legion of Honor. he did start to employ some really cutting-edge technology, such as wilt cutting, acid etching, and casing. So the casing was the layering of various glass together, and he also used special effect working in glass, such as metallic foils and air bubbles, calling his experiment marqueterie de verre, which would translate in marquetry of glass. As early as 1878, he started coloring glass with a small quantity of cobalt oxide to make a delicate sapphire tone, which he called clair de lune or moonlight. So the Japanese influence is very present when we're looking at Art Nouveau pieces. Here are some examples. They're not necessarily what we expect in the Art Nouveau. We're not necessarily used to seeing this, but when we dig a little deeper in what these artists made, we see that Japan was really a source of inspiration, and artists tend to admire the fauna and how Japanese artists incorporated flora and fauna in their pieces. So here are just some examples. And of course, they were very inspired. How were they finding out about what was made in Japan? Well, there was this magazine that was published called the Japon Artistique, which was a great source for every artist of the time. Not only Japan was important as a source of inspiration, but also the aquatic world. It was actually for Gallet one of his favorite themes, and this spot also shows the influence of Japanese ceramics. So he has used here a complex technique to conjure up the poetic atmosphere of a pond at nightfall. We see even the little air bubbles pricking to the surface of the glass, as they would do in the surface of stagnant water. What we see on top is a dragonfly and a moth that are sort of steering the mobility of the scene. And the leaded pot is made of blown crystal that was engraved and enriched with inclusion of fragments of white glass and silver flecks. And it's also inspired by a poem from Victor Hugo that I wrote here, that you can see there. Now, the flora and fauna, as I was mentioning, is always present. So here we see again on this bed the presence of the moss as well as the landscape. And in this glass, we see roses. They were often inspired by local fauna. So here, the fauna that we can see around, the flora, sorry, that we can see around Nancy. The business started to be extremely successful, and we see in this illustration, well, the illustration shows us some of the pieces that were produced, as well as the sheer size of the established, like the buildings that were used by the cristallerie, as we call it in France. So the glass workshops. It was employing many people, and it really became a successful and flourishing business. Now, another example showing both the flora and fauna. And when Émile Gallet was designing a piece of furniture, he was usually not only designing one set, but he would create several pieces that was constituting really a group of furniture pieces to furnish maybe the whole room. So there was always one central theme and several pieces that were using this theme. He actually really started manifesting his interest for woodwork and cabinetry around 1884. And even though I've said earlier that they rejected historical style, we see that a lot of there is a little bit of influence of the Rococo period in the work of Émile Gallien. Now, he also was collaborating with several author and poet, and he started to make what has been called les meubles parlants, so talking furniture. He was actually incorporating in his design some quotes of poems of poets of the time, like here a poem by Paul Verlaine, and he also collaborated with other artists. And we see that this is one of the interesting part in Nancy. There was such a cluster of artists that they were all inspiring each other and working together to really make pieces that were collaborative. You know, two brains are always better than one brain. And now, one of the artists he collaborated a lot with is Louis Majorelle, who actually trained at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris in 1877 after spending a few years in Nancy. When he returned to Nancy 2 years later in 1879, he actually went to help his brother with the family workshop of furniture and ceramics. In Nancy, the family had a storefront, and after a few years of training with the employees of his father, he started to gain a strong practical knowledge. Here we actually see part of the workshop. In 1889, he received a silver medal in the category of affordable and luxury furniture. And the following year, he created a workshop dedicated to metal work. Now, in 1897, he decided to open his own atelier, Rue du Vieil Être in Nancy, and that's where they started developing metal work that were used as ornament for the furniture, but also for lamps. And they did not produce the lamp themselves, but they were collaborating with another workshop called Dôme, and that collaboration started in 1898. Here is the marqueterie workshop in 1900, and we see that it was a large factory. This is just a small portion, but they employed over 100 workers, and the works were once again sold throughout all of Europe. In 1894, he participated in the first exhibition of Art Nouveau at the Galerie Poirel. He presented some furniture pieces that were also inspired from the 18th century, but with more modern inspiration included in it. Here, the table is an important table that was called La Source. I don't have a better picture of it, unfortunately, but it was a model presented by Jacques Gruber, another artist that we'll talk about a little later. And for that exhibition, he received recognition for his work as ebonist. Here are some better images of the type of furniture he produced. He exhibited as well in 1900 in Paris, and he was a jury member in his category. Here we see the ensemble of furniture that's of water lilies, and we see that there's very organic shapes. Everything is very rounded, and the double table actually mimics the appearance of water lilies suspended in water, and that really create a beautiful cohesion in the design. Now, here is a collaboration of Majorelle and Dôme Frère in the lamp that we see here. Again, an inspiration of the water lilies, and this beautiful cabinet that we see, who also had, they worked with other artists to create this beautiful marqueterie on the two panels in the fronts. Now, let me just go back to that picture, but I'll use it to mention that they were using, you know, they were able to produce works in series, but they were also still producing some very limited pieces with extremely rare and and precious wood essence. So in this cabinet, we see that the carcass of the cabinet is made of mahogany and oak, but all the veneer uses precious wood such as kingwood and boina and pearwood, sycamore, as well as other essence. So in 1901, Majorelle is one of the vice president of this newly founded École de Nancy. He is active in many fields of the decorative arts and opened numerous showrooms in Paris, Lyon, Lille, as well as Oran and Alger. In 1916, the factories in Nancy and the showrooms as well are unfortunately destroyed by the German bombings. And he moved to Paris, where he goes back to painting by frequenting the popular Académie Julian. And if you have joined other talks that I did for the Alliance Française, you may remember the mention of the Académie Julian. So at this time, so later, like in the 1915-16, he continued to collaborate with Antonin Dôme for stained glass windows and the reconstruction of the Nancy workshops. He died in 1926, but the workshop production continued under the direction of his brother Jules, and the workshops were active until 1956. Now, another artist I mentioned earlier for his stained glass is Jacques Gruber. Jacques Gruber was originally from Alsace, where glass was very important. And from 1889, he studied in Paris, and he returned to Nancy in 1893. He entered Dôme manufacture as a designer, and that's where he started producing models for vases, and in particular, unique pieces that were made for exhibitions. These pieces are testifying of a real harmony between the decorative composition and the techniques that were used to produce it. The example we have here, the vase with Tristan and Isolde, is a great example of the work of Jacques Gruber as a designer for Dôme. He was also teaching at the Beaux-Arts School of Nancy until 1913. From 1896 to 1898, he turned himself to the stained glass production, and it was in Lorraine a tradition that was seeing a huge rebirth, and it's also a technique. It's a work that's really linked to the burgeoning of the Art Nouveau movement in architecture, and you know, it's the stained glass is really part of the buildings that are built around the city. It's a space of transition between the inside and the outside of the buildings. And the talent of Gruber was really in his composition and the drawings that he created. He really blossomed in this technique, and he started to gain local fame very quickly. Now, the little detail you see on the lower right, we see here the depiction of an individual known as Ernest Solvay. He was a rich industrialist of the time, and he founded a factory that was producing sodium carbonate that was used in the industries of glass and metallurgy. The Solvay family were great patrons of the Art Nouveau, and they commissioned several buildings in Nancy, in Lorraine, and in Brussels as well. So Gruber collaborated very often with Louis Majorelle, as well as Albert Bergeret, and he realized stained glass windows for their he produced many works for Eugène Corbin and Albert Bergeret, who were private individuals who commissioned him business projects and private houses. So this may be one of the most important production of Jacques Gruber. which actually is not in Nancy. I'm making an exception, but I have to show you this work. Some of you may recognize it. This is a collaboration with Majorelle for the ironwork, and it is actually the coupole of the Galerie Lafayette in Paris. It's a really a work of art that is dominated by the naturalist motif. Now, one of my favorite that I really wanted to show you is this huge window, which you can probably go and see if you're in DC or around, because this is located not too far in Richmond in the Virginia Museum of Fine Art. Now, talking about Nancy itself, the Art Nouveau production are spaced out throughout the city and scattered around the city. So to discover the Art Nouveau heritage in Nancy, they've actually separated it in the different quarters, and we're going to see some of the main work in each quarter. So during the in the business inside the business center of the city, we see most some very important buildings. We see that the stone, metal, glass, and wood of the shops and banks of the city center were marked by the École de Nancy with the spirit of enterprise. And also we see the audacity of Nancy's bourgeoisie of the time for commissioning these projects that were definitely different from the norm. So let's start with one of the most famous one nowadays, which is still standing and still serving. It's the Brasserie Excelsior in Nancy. Here is an old picture. It was opened in 1911 by Moreau brothers, who were brewers in the nearby city of Vézelise. The architects were Lucien Weissenberger and Alexandre Mianville. And here is some pictures of the inside. The stained glass were again made by Jacques Gruber. We see that there's 10 stained glass windows, very large windows, and the design is mainly referring to the forest, the pines, ginkgo, ferns, and it's again the repertoire of the local flora. Now, here is the furniture, which was produced, you may guess it, by the Majorelle workshop. Here they use Cuban mahogany, and Dome provided 300 lamps in copper and glass. The sculptures in the ceiling are due to Leopold Wolff. Other important buildings are located Rue du Faubourg Saint-Jean, which is really the middle and of the whole historic town. We see Les Magasins Réunis on the left, and on the right, the famous journal L'Est Républicain. They're both by the same architect, Pierre Le Bourgeois. And here is a close-up of Les Magasins Réunis with the inside. It must be pretty impressive to walk through that door and to see that beautiful staircase. Now, I haven't included a picture of a close-up of L'Est Républicain, but I wanted to show you as well this Maison Houot. So the architect was Joseph Hornecker, and the sculpture were by Émile Surmelly. Again, we see here an evocation of the forest. It was built for a private individual. And this building is one of my favorites. It's actually it used to be for the family Génin, and they were seeds merchant. And the building was built by the architect Guton. It was his first building. It was the first building with a metal structure in Nancy. The stained glass, you can guess, were commissioned to Jacques Gruber, and the ceramics that we don't see very clearly here, they were the works of Alexandre Bigot, and we will talk about his work a little later. Now, we were talking about banks. Well, here is the Crédit Lyonnais. You can see the C and the L on the ceiling, on this massive stained glass ceiling. It really is one of the masterpieces of Jacques Gruber. It covers 250 square meters. Here are some of the detail of that window. Here are other Maisons Huot. I really like this door. It's, again, a pretty impressive sight when you walk through it. It's located Quai Claude Le Lorrain, and the architect was here, Émile André, with stained glass by Jacques Gruber. Now, another neighborhood that's really interesting to look at is the Parc de Sorupt, the Sorupt Park. It was a neighborhood in Nancy. It was sort of a garden city fantasy in the south of the city. When it was commissioned, the plan was that there should be around 20 houses, and in the end, only 6 were built. Here you can see the small caretaker's lodge. Here is a map with the plan, and you see that there's much more houses. So it was really thought through as a whole complex, a whole neighborhood. So I wish the 20 had been built, because it would really be monumental. Now, only 6 villas were built, and all the work took place between 1901 and 1910. I can't show you a lot of pictures of the insides, because they're most of them are privately owned nowadays. So I have a lot of pictures of the outside. So here is the Villa L'Eglisine, again by the architect Émile André. We see next the Villa des Roches, which was supposed to be the villa of the architect himself. The Villa Marguerite. Now it's by another architect, Joseph Ornecker. The Villa Long by Lucien Weissenberger for Henri Emmanuel Long, who was an important businessman in the textile industry. And the Villa Frenisols, which was built for Adolphe Frenisol, who was an engineer and director of the Tonnellerie Frenisol. So he was a barrel maker. The architect here was Léon Caillotte in 1908, and the glass was by Jacques Gruber. Now, there's a very sweet story for this building. So this building is actually nowadays divided in 3 apartments. And in 2020, the 3 families owning apartments of the building decided to get together and do a public fundraising campaign in order to restore the roof and the stained glass that were suffering some damages, and they needed restoring. And so it's just a sweet story that these people decided to get together and restore this building privately, but really decided to maintain, really acknowledging the importance of the Art Nouveau in the city and of this real gem that they're lucky to live in. Finally, around the Thermal Quarter, there is several houses. So it's the Spa district of Nancy that was born in the early 20th century and expanded for the International Exhibition of Eastern France in 1909. So the city really yields to nature in the streets, and they're lined with family homes and small gardens. Here we see the Musée de l'École de Nancy with the Old Salon Corbin. So it's located in the house of Eugène Corbin, who was the first collector and patron of the École de Nancy. In 1935, he donated 759 artworks. And this is now where a lot of pieces of the school are on display. And it stayed pretty much true to, we can still see how it's a house that was lived in. A lot of the things stayed as they were. And it's really nice because you walk through this museum behind on the path of these collectors who created a sort of total work of art. inside this house. The garden are also very inspiring. We see this very surprising architecture. It's one of the most original of the time. We see it's actually thought to be an aquarium, and the architect was here, Lucien Weissenberger, and the stained glass represented the aquatic life, was again designed by Jacques Gruber. The Biette House is another private house that was built by Georges Biet and Eugène Vallin, and we see inside again the stained glass of Jacques Gruber. It seems like there is like he has a monopoly over all the stained glass of Nancy. And here are this is the estate of the Rue Félix Faure. So it's a whole street that sees very attractive, colorful houses. We see all the naturalist motif on the facade, and this was developed by an architect, César Pin, who designed all of these houses that were intended primarily for middle-class people. You see that there is quite a difference with the other private houses that I've shown earlier, that are much bigger and single houses. Now, one of the most beautiful villas that you can see in Nancy is the Villa Bergeret. So Albert Bergeret was a printer who was known for the production of illustrated postcards, and he commissioned the architect Lucien Weissenberger to build his family home near his printing workshop, which no longer exists today, actually. So the greatest artists of the Nancy school collaborated on the project, and that produced a very accomplished example of the École de Nancy architecture. We see some ironwork by Louis Majorel, as well as cabinetry by Eugène Vallin, some stained glass by Gruber, and also other works of art by many of the artists we've mentioned. So there's also, I'll show you a picture on the next slide. It's an enormous ceiling painting that was commissioned by Victor Prouvé. And really, it shows us how this is thought as a complete work of art. Everything has been thought through. So this is a close-up of the ceiling. It covers all of the whole. I think I have another picture just after. So here we see one of the masterpieces by Jacques Gruber, once again, this roses and seagulls stained glass panel, and you see on the ceiling this huge painting by Victor Prouvé. Here is a stained glass by Joseph Janin, actually another stained glass designer. And it's in this beautiful sort of winter garden room where we see other stained glass. And there is just so many beautiful details in this house that I decided to showcase some of them here. On the second image, the middle image on the top is the detail of a chimney and some details of the staircase on the two images on the lower right as well. And the most beautiful masterpiece probably of Nancy, and the one that most people decide to visit if they are just doing a short visit in Nancy, a day trip. If you visit Paris and decide to go to Nancy, you would not want to miss the Villa Majorelle. So Louis Majorel, the artist, commissioned it to the Parisian architect Henri Sauvage. So it's a very, like, it really is a manifesto of the Art Nouveau movement in Nancy, a real gem, a jewel. It's part of the École de Nancy Museum nowadays, and it's open to the public since 1997. And this villa still bears witness in both in the exterior architecture and the interior decoration to the notion of unity of art advocated by the artists of the École de Nancy. We see that everything has been carefully thought through, but one of the element that makes the uniqueness of the École de Nancy is that the the everything has been thought to be useful and beautiful at the same time. So look at this door. A lot of the elements in this house were thought around the theme of this this element, this flower that you see. More than flower, it's more of a branch. It's I forget the name in English. I will look it up and tell you. It's called monnaie du pape in French, so the money of the Pope, literal translation. So the work of all the ironwork was made by Louis Majorelle himself. He also was the one behind the woodwork and the furniture in the house. The flora and fauna is present everywhere in the house, both in the interior and the exterior. And this main staircase also shows the villa's rich, seductive plains and volumes. There's more picture. So here is the living room. So we see in the lounge that the theme is the forest. The furniture and the moldings are carved with pine cones. The upholstery features a fine patterns of cones and needles, and the marquetry reveals flowers, leaves, birds, and butterflies that are also evoking a woodland grove. Stained glass by Jacques Gruber once again, and painted panels by Francis Jourdain on the top. Alexandre Bigot, that I mentioned earlier, is the one who designed the terrace balustrade and this wonderful, remarkable fireplace in the dining room. Think about it. It was probably very complicated to heat these huge houses. It's very cold in Nancy and Lorraine in general, so it must have been quite a headache to heat all these big houses. Now, we see as well in this terrace, which is actually my background. So it was meant to be an open terrace, but Louis Majorelle decided to close it. So it's now a sort of winter garden. And the sort of frescoes that is actually painted on canvas that was then applied to the wall. It was commissioned to Henri Royer, who is an artist who was born in Nancy and found most of his success with paintings inspired from the everyday life. Here we see that Louis Majorelle gave him a blank canvas for this wonderful space, and we see a poetic universe with people that are wearing clothes referring to the ancient mythology, and they're placed inside a luxuriant nature landscape. And finally, I told you there's not enough time to talk about all the little details of the house, but I wanted to show you some other little elements that we can see throughout the house. So here is the detail of the balustrade, some of the, again, this wonderful Monnaie du Pape, annual honesty, that was painted as a sort of a little detail on the top of some rooms. Some of the door details who are using, again, the local flora. And here is a detail as well of some of the paintings by Jourdain that are in the dining room. To close off this presentation, I just wanted to show you this image where we see Gika, Louis, and Jacques Majorelle that are enjoying a sunny day in their garden. And I just feel like they look so cheerful. These houses were probably full of life, and they must have appreciated living in these houses, these beautiful houses where everything was thought through. And to sum it up, I just wanted to go over like the few points that really made Nancy a unique center for the Art Nouveau. So the artists working in Nancy were able to integrate art and industry together. They were bridging the gap between fine art and applied art, and they promoted really the idea that artistic principle could be applied to everyday objects. Artists and craftsmen collaborated together on a daily basis to create decorative items that were both aesthetically pleasing as well as functional. Now, as we've seen, the artist emphasized on the natural form, local flora and fauna. There was an innovative use of all the materials. The member of the École de Nancy really tried to experiment with a wide range of material, including glass, ceramics, wood, metal, textiles, everything they could find. And they also tried and explored new techniques with these materials in doing that, pushing the boundaries of traditional craftsmanship, and really exploring the potential of each medium. Now, as we've seen, there was a distinct aesthetic. The work that they produce is characterized by the flowing lines, composition that are fundamentally asymmetrical, and intricate ornamentation. The saying less is more goes against the aesthetic of the Art Nouveau movement. And finally, one of the important points that makes Nancy very different from the rest of the Art Nouveau centers is that all of the artists working in Nancy were committed to social reform. They were really motivated by social and political ideals, and many of the members of the École de Nouveau were actively involved in progressive causes, advocating for social justice, educational reform, and also, more than anything, the democratization of art to make it accessible to everyone. So they really saw art as a powerful tool for social change, and they were thinking to make their work accessible to a wide audience. So I hope you enjoyed this talk. I would gladly take any question. I thank you for your attention, and I see here in one of the questions by Linda, what were the forces that ended the Art Nouveau style? So yes, part of it, as you say, was World War I. It sort of put an end to that movement, and there was also an emerging movement at the time that was going against this very rich, heavy aesthetic, and that is actually works by Charlotte Perriand and other artists that were looking at having something more minimalist following the World War I. So something with the economy of materials, having something cleaner, even more accessible, because trying to use more accessible material cost-wise. So that is the Art Deco movement that follows. Although it's not entirely true, because some of the production in the Art Deco movement is extremely luxurious, but it was the opposite. In the Art Deco movement, you see a lot of symmetry, a lot of organization. So really scrapping everything that the Art Nouveau has brought. So it's funny to see how these two styles that are one after the other are opposite from each other. So maybe an idea for another talk, actually, the